My guest at this time is Dr. Gary Wolfram. He is a professor of economics and public policy at Hillsdale College in Michigan. He's also a former member of the Michigan State Board of Education. And in the interest of full disclosure, he was a professor of mine. In fact, the very first class I ever took at Hillsdale, Intro to Political Economy, so we'll see how much I remember. And Dr. Wolfram, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, you have written recently for Fox Business on the issue of free college, free tuition, which is something that a lot of Democratic presidential candidates and other policy experts on the left have been advocating for a while now. And we'll get to that in a moment. But the big issue this week in the presidential campaign is Elizabeth Warren primarily, and others I'm guessing would probably be sympathetic to this, is the idea of student loan debt forgiveness. We know that a lot of students carry big debt as they leave college and enter the working world, sometimes with salaries that make it difficult to meet those payments. I believe she has some sort of means-tested way of who gets how much forgiven and so forth. But what do you make of the idea of essentially forgiving those debts?
Well, first of all, I want my reparations for the debt that, or the tuition that I paid for my kids, right? If you're going to forgive everybody else's debt, then you got to forgive mine too, right? And so how can this possibly work, right? It makes absolutely no sense. If you think about why would anyone ever take out or give someone a loan now, right? If you were a business firm, why would you loan somebody for higher education? Because they're never going to pay it back. It makes no sense at all. It can't possibly work. And how would you deal with the fact that some wealthier person took out a $100,000 loan and that's all going to get forgiven, and you're going to be making it so that some person that went to a skilled trade school and learned to be a welder, they're not going to get forgiven. This makes no sense at all.
Now that the government essentially controls at least the federal student loan program, how does that change the approach to this, the calculation that either Senator Warren's making or others might make as they try to figure out any variety of ways of how to relieve student debt payments?
Well, think about how this would work. Why are we in this position to start with is sort of the issue I'm trying to get at here. Yeah. Is that it was the government going out and lending lots of money to people without any looking back to see if they're going to be able to pay it off. It's not like when you borrow money for a house, they look for their collateral, they look to see you're going to pay it off. This isn't the way it works, right? The government, the way their student loan program, was set up, is that it just gives it off to anybody with no thought of paying it back. And so we shouldn't be surprised we are where we are. The reason that we have such high tuition to start with is because the government has been out there subsidizing people and trying to, let people get into higher education that should probably be in the skilled trades. And so if you increase, I wrote a piece 15 years ago for Cato Policy Institute on how government granting loans and government subsidizing higher education increases the demand for it. And so we should expect to see the price go up, which is what we saw. Just the same as if the government started subsidizing people for buying hot dogs, we'd expect to see the price of hot dogs going up. And so the reason you've got skyrocketing tuitions and therefore more and more loans being taken out is because there's this cycle of the government providing loans to get people to go to college, and then more people are going to college, and it's driving up the price of college, which gives more loans, and you get what Mises talked about as the unintended consequences of this whole thing.
So you've established the problem. How do we break that cycle and ultimately bring costs down for those who should be going to college? And we'll get to that in a moment about what they want to do with their lives. But if we want to bring the cost back down into the normal range, how do you do it?
Well, there's two things. One is you don't have all sorts of people trying to go to college that really would be better off doing something else, what we call your opportunity costs. What else would they be doing with their time? So we know that, for example, there's a shortage of 50,000 truck drivers who earn about $80,000 a year. We know that 80% of all the contractors, construction firms, have trouble hiring people because there's a shortage of about 400,000 jobs in the construction industry. So that would start producing more stuff in the United States. We'd have more welders and we'd have more truck drivers and lower cost of transportation. But at the same time, then, you'd have less demand for higher education, so tuition costs would come down. Now, how you pay for that is, if you go back to Milton Friedman, who wrote about this in the early 1960s, what he called human capital contracts, where I would find a student that is, in, let's say, a high school student, and I would say, I'll pay your college tuition in return for some equity in your earnings. So we'd say, maybe 10% of your earnings for the first 10 years or something like that. And so then what would happen is that business firms would get into this business and they would start seeking out students to invest in, and students who are, you're a high school junior or a high school sophomore, you're going, wow, I should really work hard. I should try to get good grades because there's somebody out there looking for people to invest in. We do that exact thing with athletics, don't we, right? The colleges go out and recruit high school kids to play athletics. You'd have the same thing going on, only now what would happen is investors would be recruiting high school kids to go in to college and then get out and earn money. And so you'd find people going into college that had a better chance of using that degree to increase their income.
Oh, I'd like to be the Zion Williamson of radio. That'd be kind of fun.
Yes, exactly.
I'm a benefactor along the way. Just a minute or two left in our conversation here, and the column you wrote, which talked a lot about the jobs that are going unfilled and skilled labor and so forth, because everyone is being kind of funneled into the four-year college, at least, approach to higher education. When we hear about free tuition, obviously it doesn't mean that money's not exchanging hands. It just means that other people are paying for it. So what's the price tag for the taxpayer if public school tuition is not actually charged to the people who are attending the college?
Well, we don't know what the price tag is, because if you say we're going to pay the tuition, and we can't do it with Hillsdale because we don't take government money, but let's say you're Albion College, why wouldn't you charge $200,000 a year for tuition? Because the government's paying for it, right? So then the government's going to go, oh my gosh, this is incredibly expensive. What we're going to do is we're going to say, here's how much you're going to pay, or here's how much tuition's going to have to be. And then they'll say, tuition's got to be $10,000 a year. That won't be enough to fund all the increase in teachers and et cetera that you're going to need to have all these kids come in. So then the government's also going to go, well, gee, when we're doing that, we're going to tell you what has to be in higher education. Here's the classes that you have to offer. So you're going to end up with basically the Obamacare of higher education is what you're going to end up with.
Finally, I guess it's the real exit question here is we obviously have a lot of folks on the left explaining what they want in terms of student loan debt forgiveness and in terms of free, quote-unquote, college tuition, certainly at the public level. You've explained why both of those are terrible ideas and what would be a better way to make higher education more affordable and ways to encourage folks who probably don't need to go to college to explore those other possibilities. The left seems pretty organized in this. How organized is the counterargument that you're making on the right?
Well, I think you're right. I think that the counter-argument is not being well made. I mean, and your show helps win the battle of ideas because the problem is what Sherlock Holmes said to Watson. He says, the problem with you, Watson, is you see but you don't observe. And so what will happen is people see, oh, yeah, free tuition, that's great. Oh, yeah, free loan forgiveness, that's great. But they won't see they won't observe all the other things that are going to happen once you try to do this. And you're basically going to have a federal government takeover completely of higher education, and with telling people what colleges, what they have to offer, and how much they're going to charge. The government's going to pay for the tuition, and they won't observe this whole unintended consequences that Mises talked about.
Dr. Wolfram, good to be with you as always. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks for calling.
Dr. Gary Wolfram is a professor of economics and public policy at Hillsdale College in Michigan. He is a former member of the Michigan State Board of Education. His column, Tuition-Free College, Not Quite the Deal Democrats Expect, was published March 22nd at foxbusiness.com. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.